They first saw her near the old rockfall, where no rider dared take a horse and no tracks lasted longer than a storm. 2 Lakota scouts had gone after a wounded antelope and spotted her by accident. A woman crouched barefoot behind a tumble of boulders, knees drawn to her chest, eyes wild as a trapped doe. Her feet were blistered raw, cracked open in places, but she didn't move when they called. She just stared. One of the scouts dismounted and approached, slow as sunrise. Still, she didn't speak. Not when they offered water, not when they wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, not even when she winced from the pain of stepping forward. Her dress was torn at the hem and dusted with ash, the kind left from house fires or worse. But there was no blood, no bruises, only silence. Back at camp, the people watched as she was led in like a dream, silent and limping. She didn't speak their tongue, and she didn't try to. A few of the elders whispered, wondering if she'd escaped from a settler's wagon, or worse, been left behind by her own family. One said she looked like someone who had tried to vanish herself, not just the trail. No one asked for her name because she didn't offer it, not even when Shuya, the midwife, gently cleaned her feet with wild mint and warm cloths. Not even when the children gathered in curiosity, their giggles turning to hushes as they saw the deep burns on her soles. Only one man kept his eyes on her from a distance, the one they called Nashoda, whose name meant, "Stand still while storms pass." He didn't speak either, but he noticed everything. How she flinched at the sound of men's boots, how she kept glancing toward the canyon's mouth, as if expecting someone, or something, to come for her. That night, she ate alone. The bowl of soup remained half full beside her, steam curling in the cool air. When the others had gone to sleep, she limped back toward the creek, ignoring the cold, and sat with her legs in the water like she wanted to scrub something no one else could see. From the shadows, Nashoda watched. Not like a predator, not like a protector, just still. He didn't move until she whispered the only words she'd spoken all day. "I'm not worthy to be anyone's bride." And then, barefoot as she was, she stepped into the water as if hoping the river might forget her name. By morning, the girl had returned to the lodge they gave her, a small canvas tent near the edge of camp, shaded by pine. Shuya found her sitting cross-legged outside, attempting to bind her feet with scraps torn from her own dress. The older woman knelt, gently brushed her hands aside, and finished the task in silence. Only when she stood again did the girl finally lift her gaze, and there, by the tree line, stood Nashoda. He hadn't slept in the lodge circle like the others. Some said he preferred the trees, where breath was cleaner and wind honest. Others said he carried ghosts too loud for walls. But when his eyes met hers, the girl startled, as if she'd been caught stealing warmth from someone else's fire. She turned quickly, but it was too late. He'd seen the shame written across her skin, not just the bruises that weren't there, or the burns that shouldn't have been endured, but the way she held herself, as if her body was borrowed, undeserved. Nashoda approached slowly, not with words but with hands open. In them a folded square of soft deerskin. She looked at it like a trap. He knelt, not close, but close enough for the gesture to land like thunder. Then he unwrapped the cloth to reveal a paste of crushed willow bark and healing roots. She didn't reach for it, so he set it down, gave her one long look that held no pity, no questions, only quiet understanding. Then turned and walked away. Hours passed before she touched the paste. That night, Shuya brought her supper and found the cloth rinsed, folded, and placed near the tent's flap, offering returned with dignity. But it wasn't until the third night, after another walk to the creek, that something shifted. Nashoda was there again, not hiding, just seated on a fallen log, sharpening a stone blade. She didn't run. She didn't speak either. But she sat nearby, letting the silence between them speak for her. A breeze tugged her hair loose, and for a moment she looked like someone halfway between broken and reborn. Then she surprised them both, lifting one foot slowly and placing it in his direction, raw heel pressing into earth, as if to say, "If you're going to look, look now." He didn't flinch. He didn't smile, but he set down the blade and, without permission, without ceremony, reached for a fresh cloth from his satchel and began washing the ash from her foot. She gasped once, then sobbed, but didn't pull away. Shuya told the others not to crowd her, not to ask questions about where she came from or why her feet bore fire's kiss. But rumors slithered through the camp like smoke, and even the children watched her as if she might vanish with the morning frost. She ate little, spoke even less, and never ventured far beyond the line of stones she arranged herself around her tent, some small illusion of control. Nashoda never asked her name. He never touched her again. But each evening, as the sun sank behind the canyon wall, he left something beside her tent: healing balm, sweetened roots, a woven shawl. Never too much, never too bold, just enough to say, "You're not invisible here." But shame makes a woman deaf to kindness. She'd sit, staring at her blistered feet, whispering things under her breath like prayers gone sour. He said I'd ruined everything. He said no man would... She'd trail off, curling her shoulders inward, as if trying to disappear into the dirt. Shuya finally sat her down one evening with broth and quiet eyes. "The scars are not what make you unworthy," she said. "It's the lie someone told you about them." The girl looked away, eyes wet but burning. "You don't know what I did. I let him when I thought it meant something." Her voice cracked. "Then when the fire came, he ran, and I stayed, and they said it was my fault." Shuya's jaw clenched. "Whose fire?" "My father's," she whispered. "He found out I was to marry the blacksmith's son, said it brought shame, said he'd cleanse the house. I wasn't fast enough. I got out, but my sister..." She didn't finish, just pressed her palms to her eyes and rocked forward. Shuya stood and walked away before the girl could see her own hands shaking. That night, Nashoda approached the tent differently. Not with medicine, not with silence, but with words. He sat near the stones she'd laid and said, "In my tongue there's no word for ruined, only for marked by fire, and fire means transformation." She froze. "You speak?" she whispered. He nodded once. "Only when the silence is too cruel." She stared at him, trying to understand how a man who hadn't touched her hand, hadn't asked her for anything, could carry such gentleness. "I don't deserve any of this," she murmured. "I'm not worthy to be someone's bride." He didn't argue. He just looked at her feet, wrapped in the cloth he'd brought, and said nothing. But she saw his jaw tighten and his hands curl slightly. And she knew in that breathless pause that he was battling something inside himself. Grief, maybe, or fury, or the kind of reverence that scared him more than war. The night air smelled of pine smoke and river ice, and her feet ached more from memory than pain. She sat outside her tent with her knees drawn up, watching the flicker of distant lodge fires. Most of the village had gone quiet, save for one drum that beat slow and low, a lullaby for those still awake. She hadn't expected Nashoda to appear, but she knew the sound of his steps before she saw him. Soft, deliberate, never hurried. He stopped a few paces away, crouched to one knee, and set down a small carved bowl of warm river water. "Why?" she asked, her voice more shadow than breath. "You don't even know me." He didn't speak. Instead, he removed the rolled cloth tucked under his belt, a soft deerskin towel, and laid it beside the bowl. He waited, eyes steady, not demanding, not kind, just present, the kind of presence that makes silence feel safe. She hesitated, heart thudding like a trapped bird. Her feet were blistered, cracked, still ugly from the fire. No one had touched them since that night, since the blacksmith's son had flinched and walked away. But Nashoda didn't move. Finally, trembling, she slid her foot toward the bowl. He reached for it slowly, like someone handling a sacred object, and dipped it into the warm water. She gasped. It wasn't pain, but something stranger. The shock of tenderness. He didn't scrub or rush, just passed the wet cloth, over each arch, each toe, like he was memorizing rather than cleaning. The fire had taken skin, but he treated each mark like a story worth honoring. When he moved to her other foot, she whispered, "I don't understand." His hands paused. "My sister died the night the soldiers came. She was younger than you." He didn't say more, didn't need to. The grief in his voice wasn't dramatic. It was weathered, real. And in that moment, she realized he wasn't just kneeling for her. He was kneeling for someone he'd lost, for a girl no one saved, for all the women made to carry shame that wasn't theirs. When he finished, he wrapped both feet in warm cloth and sat back, still kneeling, still silent. She opened her mouth to thank him but couldn't form the words. Instead, she leaned forward and touched his hand. Just once. Then, quietly, she said, "My name is Talina." He nodded, not smiling, not blinking. "I know." And then he stood, leaving the bowl, the towel, and something larger behind, something she couldn't name, but felt settling deep inside her like a prayer answered before it was spoken. She didn't sleep that night. Not fully. The warmth from the wrapped cloths still lingered around her feet. But it was the memory of his hands, gentle, reverent, that kept circling in her chest. She sat by the small fire, knees hugged to her chest, whispering the name he'd spoken. Talina. Not girl, not intruder, not whore. Just her. The name she'd been trying to outrun for 2 years. At dawn, Shuya appeared with herbs and flatbread, her expression unreadable. "You let him wash your feet," she said plainly, as if naming a weather shift. Talina didn't answer. "The women know," Shuya added, kneeling to tend the fire. "Some are jealous, others are watching." Talina flinched. "I didn't ask him to." "That's not what they're seeing. And it's not what he was offering either." The older woman stirred the pot, then sighed. "We've lost too many girls in too many winters. No one touches a woman's feet unless he sees her spirit as sacred. You'll have to decide what to do with that kind of mercy." Talina swallowed, her heart now racing in ways no man had ever made it do. Not even the one who got her with child. Not even the one who said he loved her and left her burned and alone. She looked down at her toes, wrapped and warm, and felt the truth pressing against her throat. "He shouldn't," she said. "If he knew what I've done, what I lost, he'd leave me in the snow like the others did." "You think he doesn't know sorrow?" Shuya said, her voice softer now. "His sister's death was not just a wound. It was a war inside him. And yet, he brings peace. That's not a man who judges. That's a man who listens for stories no one else dares to tell." Later, Talina stepped outside the lodge. The wind had calmed, and the frost glistened like stars had spilled onto the earth. Nashoda stood not far, feeding his horse. He didn't turn, but said, "I'll walk you to the edge of the woods. The wolves won't bother you if I'm near." "Why would I leave?" she asked, stunned by the offer's implication. "Because some women run when they're shown kindness." She took a breath. "I'm tired of running." He finally turned, eyes steady as ever. Then stay, but not for me. Stay because you know your name again. Her legs nearly gave beneath her, and for the first time in years, she felt the heat behind her eyes, not as shame, but as something trying to melt through it, something like healing, something dangerously close to hope. The days passed like wind over snow, quiet, constant, reshaping everything beneath the surface. Talina stayed in the camp, not because anyone told her to, but because leaving no longer felt like survival. She helped Shuya sort herbs, mended children's moccasins with trembling fingers, and kept her gaze low whenever Nashota entered the clearing. He didn't touch her again, not even a brush of the hand. But the silence between them had changed. It wasn't empty now. It was full of things unsaid, things seen. One afternoon, she caught a few of the younger women whispering. One pointed at her feet, another at the comb she now wore braided into her hair, something Shuya had tucked there gently, without comment. Talina turned away, shame rising again, but this time it didn't choke her. She carried firewood to the edge of camp, where Nashota was sharpening his knife near the drying racks. "They're saying things," she said without preamble. "Things about you and me." He didn't look up. "What do you say?" She hesitated. "I don't know." "Then say nothing," he replied. "Until you do." He handed her a strip of smoked meat, not as an offering but as a reminder, of hunger, of patience, of things that didn't need to be rushed. "You never asked what I was before this," she said suddenly. "You think it matters?" Most men made it matter. Now he looked up. Then they were not men. They were frightened boys in bigger clothes. She stared at him. "You speak like someone who's known love." A flicker of something passed through his eyes. "I've known loss. The words come from there." That night, Shuya set an extra bowl on the firestone and said nothing. Nashota arrived late, silent as usual, and took the spot beside Talina. No one commented, but the shift in the circle was felt like thunder wrapped in cloth. After they ate, he stood slowly and extended a hand. Not to dance, not to pull her away, but simply to help her rise. She didn't take it. Not yet. But she looked at it long enough that the others noticed. And in that long pause, the camp saw more than a girl who had been left behind. They saw a story rewriting itself. Later, in the hush of the lodge, Shuya whispered, "You can say no, even now." Talina stared, into the fire. "He hasn't asked." "Not allowed," Shuya said, curling into her blanket. "But men like him ask with what they carry, not what they say." Talina looked down at her feet again, still wrapped, still healing. The warmth hadn't left since the night he'd knelt. And somewhere deep, the word bride stopped sounding like mockery. It began to sound like a beginning. The next morning brought a sky so clear it felt like a blessing. Talina stepped out of the lodge before anyone stirred, walking toward the edge of camp where the earth dipped into a grove of firs. She had dreamed of her mother the night before, of her voice, not angry or ashamed, but soft and humming, brushing Talina's hair like she used to when she was small. In the dream, her mother said nothing, only watched as Talina walked barefoot into a river and came out wearing someone else's name. She awoke breathless, with tears she didn't understand. Now she needed air. Nashota was already in the trees, working with his knife on a crooked branch. He didn't flinch when she appeared. "You dreaming loud again?" he asked. She blinked. "What?" "You sigh like wind in the trees. Hard to miss." Talina half smiled. "I dreamed of someone who never knew me." He didn't ask who. He only pointed to the branch. "You think this is strong enough to hold a woman's weight?" She narrowed her eyes. "Planning to hang someone?" Planning to build a cradle, he said evenly. For a deerskin, maybe. Or a child, one day. Her heart thudded. That's forward. Forward is the only direction worth walking. She sat beside him, knees tucked up like a child. I've never told you what happened, she said. You haven't asked me to. He let the knife glide against the wood, slow and steady. I was promised to a man I didn't choose. I ran before the wedding. I was found. I begged my father not to send me back. She picked at a scab on her knuckle. He said if I was so eager to act like a woman, I should learn what it meant to be owned like one. Nashoda's hand stopped. He said nothing, but the branch snapped in two between his fingers. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Do you want to go back? He asked finally. To that house? That name? Talina shook her head. I want to forget I ever lived before you washed my feet. That stunned him. Truly. He blinked once, and then set the broken wood aside. We don't speak vows like the settlers do, he said, but we offer what's ours. If I give you my bow, my fire, my ground to sleep on, it means I will never leave you cold. And if I give you my name? She whispered. It will be the first one that fits, he said, standing. Come. We have to cut more wood. A cradle needs sides. Talina rose, not knowing if he meant it literally or not. But for the first time, walking beside him didn't feel borrowed. It felt like she belonged. That night, a hush fell over the camp, not from fear or weariness, but something heavier, like the entire sky was holding its breath. Talina lay inside the lodge, wrapped in the same blanket she'd first arrived in, the one Nashoda had dried by his fire. Shuya had gifted her a soft fox pelt to line the floor, and now her cheeks pressed into it as sleep hovered just out of reach. She heard footsteps approach, light but certain, and the flap of the lodge shifted. Nashoda entered without speaking. He knelt by the fire pit, fed it 2 dry sticks, and stirred the embers into a steady glow. His presence no longer startled her. It steadied her. I couldn't sleep, she whispered. Then don't, he said. Sometimes sleep forgets things we're not ready to lose. She sat up slowly, the blanket falling to her lap. I keep thinking it's a mistake, that I'll wake up back in that cold house with him waiting outside the door. Nashoda didn't move closer. He remained kneeling. Do you believe I'd let anyone take you? Not anymore, she said softly. Then, after a beat, but I still don't believe I deserve to stay. His brows tightened, and for the first time his voice cracked ever so slightly. You keep saying that you're unworthy, that you're broken. He reached behind his back and pulled something from a pouch, her comb. The ivory teeth were bent, a few snapped off. You dropped this the night you arrived. I kept it because it reminded me of you. She stared. It's ruined. Exactly, he said. And still, it holds the strands of your hair. It still glows when the fire touches it. You say you're not worthy of being my bride, but Talina... He paused, folding the comb gently into her hands. I have never once looked at you and seen anything less than ceremony. Her breath caught. Ceremony? Like water poured on new ground, like smoke rising on the first snow, like a name whispered so carefully it changes the man who says it. The words didn't land in her ears. They landed in her bones. She looked at the comb, the way it curved imperfectly, and felt tears push behind her eyes. Will you sit? She asked. He hesitated, then nodded. She moved the blanket aside, baring her feet. He didn't speak again. He simply took a bowl of warm water, dipped the cloth, and began to wash them. Slowly, tenderly, reverently. The woman who had once crawled through dirt to survive now sat with her chin high, watching a warrior kneel not in pity, but in quiet honor. And in that moment, every unspoken vow between them was sealed without a word. Morning came soft, like a child brushing hair away from a sleeping mother's face. Talina woke, curled around the blanket, her eyes dry but swollen, her hands still wrapped around the carved comb. Outside, the lodge murmured with quiet movement. Boots on grass, baskets being lifted, soup simmering in, distant pots. She sat up slowly and found Nashoda sitting by the fire just beyond the entrance. His posture was still, his breath steady, as if he had been keeping watch all night. When she stepped out, he turned slightly, offering her half a smile. "They're waiting," he said. She looked past him and saw the gathering. Shuya, the elders, the young ones who'd brought her firewood, even the old man who'd fixed her moccasins. A circle of faces, solemn and expectant, arranged by something deeper than tradition. "For what?" she asked. Nashoda rose and took a step toward her. "For your answer." "What answer?" she whispered, to the question no one dared ask, but every heart already knows. He gestured to the center of the circle, where a beaded shawl and a pair of polished antlers lay across a folded buffalo robe. "If you step forward, Talina, if you place your feet on that robe, you will not be returning to the girl who was given away." Talina's throat tightened. She thought of the barn where she'd hidden bruises beneath wool skirts, of the winter nights she'd scraped ash to make her food last longer, of her father's silence after the violence. And then she thought of Shuya's laughter, the way it filled a space like a warming flame. She thought of the baby owl Nashoda had cradled after it fell from the tree. She stepped forward. The circle parted, not with applause but with reverence. She reached the robe, then slowly, deliberately, knelt upon it. Her fingers touched the shawl, and her head bowed. Not in shame, but in recognition of something greater than herself. From behind, she heard a single drumbeat, then another. And then, a woman's voice lifted into the sky with a song older than names. When Nashoda came to kneel beside her, he didn't take her hand. He didn't need to. His presence alone anchored her. "You once whispered that you weren't worthy," he murmured, so close she could feel it against her temple. "But in this circle, you are not asked to be worthy. You are only asked to be true." Talina closed her eyes. And for the first time, in a language born of silence and firelight, she whispered back, "Then I am yours." That night, the lodge glowed from within like a lantern tucked into the heart of the mountain. Smoke curled gently from the central chimney as the wind slowed, and the stars blinked above like curious witnesses. Inside, Talina moved quietly, placing bowls, tucking in children, brushing stray ash from the woven rugs. No one had told her to do it. She simply moved like someone who knew where things belonged. Nashoda stood at the entrance, speaking low with Shuya and two of the elders, but his eyes returned to her often, like the fire returning to its coals. When she approached with a cup of heated root tea, he didn't take it at first. Instead, he studied her face, her soft hands, her still wet lashes. "You could have run," he said. "Back to town, to whatever life they left you with." She nodded. "I almost did." "Why didn't you?" She placed the tea into his hands, then rested her fingers against the rim for a long breath. "Because the first time you touched my feet, I felt something that had nothing to do with shame. You didn't want to own me. You wanted me to rise." Nashoda's throat worked around words that didn't come. He set the tea down and stepped back. "Come with me," he said. Outside, the night air was colder than she expected. He led her down the path toward the riverbank, where the ice had begun to break in slow, whispering cracks. A new shelter had been constructed there, a small round structure made of pine beams and deer hides, with feathers tied above the entrance. She froze. "What is this?" "A place that's yours," he said. "Not given, not traded, not earned, just offered." She turned to him slowly, her eyes searching his. "Why me?" "Because I once swore never to take a bride. Not after war took my brother, my sister, half my heart. I thought the fire in me had gone out. But you—" He exhaled and touched the space just above his chest. "You sat in silence. You wept without noise. You reminded me that fire doesn't have to rage. Sometimes it just waits for someone who knows how to keep it." She stepped into him, her head resting against his collarbone. They stood like that until her breath steadied and the wind softened around them like a blessing. "Will you ever ask me to forget where I came from?" she asked. "Never," he whispered. "Only to remember that you were never meant to stay there." She looked toward the shelter once more, and finally walked through its door. Behind her, the fire inside was already lit. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Echoes of the West. If you saw a man kneel not to take, but to honor, would you have trusted him too? Tell us in the comments.